Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now. Are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements.
Size. I think you should go to Size.
Size Digital Partners.
Be amazed of knowledge, industries, manufacturing, optics, hardware, software,
AR, VR,
Machine Learning,
infrastructure.
Ich will nicht aufstehen und irgendwie mir denken, scheiße, ich muss meinen Job machen, sondern was kann ich heute machen?
You will make it happen. Do it.
Are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now. Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
Size.
I think you should go to Size.
Zeiss digital partners.
Be amazed of knowledge, industries, manufacturing, optics, hardware, software,
AR, VR.
Machine Learning.
infrastructure.
Ich will nicht aufstehen und irgendwie mir denken, scheiße, ich muss meinen Job machen, sondern was kann ich heute machen?
You will make it happen. Do it.
Hello everybody, welcome back, welcome back. Up next we have an absolute web hero. He's one of my personal heroes, one of the first talks I ever saw, and I've loved his work ever since. I think you're very much going to enjoy it. He's going to be talking about design principles for the web. He's written a ton of books, most recently Going Offline. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everybody in this room, please raise the roof for the one and good luck.
Thank you. Vielen Dank, Justin. Guten Morgen, Berlin. Guten Morgen. Und vielen Dank für Ihre Geduld. Here I am at WeAreDevelopers. I myself am a developer, but I have come to talk about design. But I think this will be quite applicable. I work at a design agency, Clear Left. It's a design agency I co-founded like 17 years ago now. And if we're going to talk about design, we kind of have to talk about the design process, which immediately introduces a problem because the design process is a very tricky thing to pin down. This is one way of thinking about the design process. This is The Design Squiggle by Damien Newman at IDEO. And I actually think it's a pretty good representation of what the design process and the development process feels like for an individual designer or developer, where like at the beginning it's just chaos and entropy, and then we sort of focus in and we get to a solution. But I don't think it really represents the design process when it comes to collaboration and working with other people. So there's another diagram that really resonates with us at Clear Left. And this comes from Chris Vanston at the Design Council, and you've probably seen it. It's the double diamond. And one way of thinking about the double diamond is it's kind of like two design squiggles back to back, right? And it's split into these kind of four stages where you've got the discovery and definition phase, that's one diamond, and then execution and delivery. And one way this is often talked about is that the first bit is about building the right thing, and the second bit is about building the thing right. And it's very simplified. I mean, in reality, these things aren't four equal parts. One of these diamonds might be much, much bigger than the other. But the useful part of the double diamond diagram is that it makes it really explicit when you're diverging and when you're converging. So the idea is first you diverge in this discovery phase, you're taking in all the inputs, and then you converge when you're defining what the solution is going to be. And then for execution you go wide again, so you're not leaving any bad idea, good ideas on the table, and then you narrow into the final thing you're going to deliver. This itself is just, I think, the most useful part of this way of thinking, is making it explicit at any phase in the process, whether we're being divergent or whether we're being convergent. Like, if you take nothing else from this talk, that's really useful. Like, if you're going to have a meeting, make it really clear to start whether the meeting is divergent or convergent. If it's a divergent meeting, you make it clear, like, there's no bad ideas. We're trying to get as many things out as possible from our heads out onto the table, right? Because if you don't make it clear, then there's someone in the room who's always going to go like, oh no, that's a bad idea, or that's technically not feasible, or here's why that won't work. And those are all reasonable points to bring up, but not in a divergent meeting. Likewise, if you're having a convergent meeting, like it's a week until launch and you need to come to a decision, and that's the purpose of the meeting, you make that clear, that we're converging on a decision. Because what you don't want in that meeting is someone who thinks it's divergent going, oh yeah, I just had a great idea for a feature we could add. Right? That now is not the time for that. And I think at Clear Left, we probably, in the past, spent a lot of our time in this second part of the diamond, the execution and delivery, where these days we spend a lot of our time in that first bit of the diamond, where it's the discovery phase, where we do a whole bunch of exercises, business model canvases, pre-mortems, and lots of research, as much research as we can get in there. And the whole point of doing these exercises, the whole point of doing research, is you're trying to surface assumptions. There's always going to be assumptions at any project, and it's better to get those assumptions out and onto the table as early as possible. And when I think about assumptions, assumptions to me are kind of a combination of two things. They're your expectations of what's going to happen, plus your biases, like things you inherently believe, perhaps without even knowing it. We've heard about biases earlier today in the context of AI, and it sounds like it's always a bad thing, but as we heard, one of the ways of thinking about biases is actually your values are kind of your biases. Like the things you believe so deeply you might not even realize you believe them. These are, why you do anything, right? Your values, your inherent values. Now, at Clear Left, let's say design agency, we have values. We have the values of our agency. I am not going to share Clear Left's values with you for two reasons. One, they're Clear Left's values, so it's not really relevant to you. Two, there is nothing more boring than a company sharing their values with you, right? I mean, I say there's nothing more boring. Well, actually, the one thing I find like maybe as boring as a company sharing the values is like when a so-called friend insists on telling you about the dream they had last night, and you just have to like smile and nod and listen when it's clearly something that's only of interest to them. So I'm not going to share that. But values are interesting because what values do is they encode your purpose. And again, this could be you as an individual, it could be you as an organization, it could be a software, it could be a service. But the purpose is why. Why are you even here? Why are you doing this? So you got your purpose, and then the purpose can influence your principles, which is, well, how are we going to do this? Again, this could be you as a person, how are you going to do it? As an organization, how are we going to do this? How will you conduct yourself? How will you behave? And then those principles in turn affect the final patterns, kind of what the end user gets to see. This is the what. This is what you actually end up doing. I mean, this is literally the patterns in a user interface, right? So you've got the purpose influencing the principles influencing the pattern. And that's why I'm kind of so obsessed with this middle bit, the principles, because they sit between the big why question and then the nitty-gritty what. What are the actual patterns? Specifically, design principles. I'm obsessed with design principles. I'm so obsessed with design principles, I actually collect them. This is like my equivalent of an interesting rock collection. It's my collection of design principles. You can find at this URL, principles.adactio.com. And what I do there is I try to just assemble the principles. I don't pass judgment. I don't say whether they're good, bad, or whether they resonate. It's just a collection of design principles. And a lot of organizations have published design principles. Like a while back, Google published 10 things we know to be true, where they list, these truisms such as, you can make money without doing evil. No comment there. They also published another set of design principles, another 10. This was 10 principles that contribute to a googly user experience. They don't talk much about that one, probably out of sheer embarrassment of using the word googly in public like that. But I do have to say, I'm always a bit suspicious whenever I see collections of design principles that are exactly 10. Like, it always seems too neat to me. Like, maybe you had 8 or 9 and you thought, ooh, if we can have just one more, we'll make it to a nice round 10. Even Dieter Rams and his fantastic collection of design principles, 10 principles for good design. They're great, but wirklich, Dieter? Genau 10? I'm just suspicious, right? And you might be thinking, blasphemy. He's saying that Dieter Rams, is possibly doing something wrong. No, it is not blasphemy to point this out about Dieter Rams' 10 design principles. It would be blasphemy if I pointed out that it was 10 commandments in the Bible. That's blasphemy. So this is kind of like a little test I have. Like, if it's exactly 10 or some other round number, like, I'm suspicious. Which makes me think, are there other kind of tests for design principles? ways of telling if a design principle is good or bad. Like, is it even possible to objectively weigh up design principles? To get really meta about it, are there design principles for design principles? And I think there might be. Let me give you an example. So let's say you've got a design principle that states, make it usable. Now, I would say this is a bad design principle. Not because I don't agree with it. I agree with it. But presumably so does everybody else. That's what makes it a bad design principle. It's so agreeable, it's kind of hardly worth saying. But suppose it were rephrased to something like, usability is more important than profitability. Ooh, now we're talking. Spicy. Now we can have disagreement. And to be honest, that's more useful, right? Because now you're talking about prioritization, and that's key. In fact, a really good sort of framework for design principles is if you can frame them as, blank even over blank. So two things, you like both of them, but you're going to prioritize one over the other. So you could say usability even over profitability. That's now a better design principle. And this passes another sort of smell test for design principles, which is the reversibility test. So you might have this design principle at one particular organization or software or service, but you could imagine a different organization, a different piece of software that had the reverse design principle, profitability even over usability, and it still makes sense in that context. So that is a good test of a design principle. If we were somewhere else and you were averse to this principle, would it make sense in a different context? One of my favorite design principles, because yes, I am such a nerd for design principles, I do have a favorite. It comes from the HTML design principles, and it's called the priority of constituencies. It's got the word priority right there in the name, and it states, in case of conflict, consider users over authors, over implementers, over theoretical purity. It's beautiful. I mean, first of all, it starts with in case of conflict. Yes, that's what design principles are for, is for arguments, frankly. Right? Design principles aren't these feel-good things, you put on a poster with a picture of a whale or something to, feel good about yourself. No, you're supposed to have arguments with design principles. And then this is basically saying users, even over authors, authors, even over implementers, implementers, even over theoretical purity. So very specific, I think, to the web, but makes me wonder, if design principles are supposed to be specific to you or your organization, your piece of software, your service, is it even possible to have universal principles? Principles that apply no matter what? Kind of, I think. We don't call them design principles. They tend to be eponymous laws, right? Usually named after a person, and they're treated as truisms. So here's an example. Hofstadter's Law, named after Douglas Hofstadter. And Hofstadter's Law states, it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's Law. So a nice bit of recursion in Hofstadter's Law there. And this certainly has the feeling of truth to it. Like, I look at this and go, yeah, that tracks. Yeah, it really does always seem to take longer. So maybe that is a universal truth. Well, we got Sturgeon's Law. Theodore Sturgeon was a science fiction writer, and people used to complain, but science fiction is crap, right? And he said, yeah, but he said 90% of everything is crap. And you look at the movies, you look at popular music, you look at books, and that sounds like a universal truth. 90% of everything is crap. Here's one you've probably heard of, Murphy's Law, right? Kind of always used jokingly, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. I actually think this is a super useful principle. And this was a real person. Aloysius Murphy was an aerospace engineer, and because he had this attitude, nobody ever died on his watch. I think this is something we could learn from. Then there's Cole. You've probably heard of Cole's Law. That's shredded raw cabbage with a vinaigrette or mayonnaise dressing. That's coleslaw. Oh, jeez. No, please. You're embarrassing yourselves and me now. So maybe we can't look at universal principles, but perhaps we can look at design principles that informed the medium we work in. And the medium I work in is the World Wide Web. And I wonder, were there design principles that informed the creation of the web that I could borrow to use in my work on the web? Web famously created by Sir Tim Berners-Lee when he was working at CERN down there on the French-Swiss border. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. It was March 1989 when he published this kind of memo, his proposal. It was like really badly written, full of typos and incomprehensible diagrams with a really unsexy title, Information Management of Proposal. But his supervisor, Mike Sendall, must have seen something in this because he scrawled across the top, vague but exciting. So Tim Berners-Lee gets the go-ahead to build this information management hypertext system he's proposing, and he does so on this computer. This was his next computer. This is in the Science Museum in London, and I have a real soft spot for this machine. We kind of got to know it pretty well when I was invited along with a bunch of other nerds to CERN in the run-up to the 30th anniversary of the web, where we got to work on this hack project. You can see the URL for it there, worldwideweb30.com. And the idea was we were going to create, recreate the experience of using that very first web browser that Tim Berners-Lee created, also confusingly called World Wide Web, the browser, but that you could use it in a modern browser. So if you go to this URL, you can see how a modern website would look in the world's first web browser. I say I was working on this. I didn't build this. There was much smarter people than me were doing this part of it. I was kind of working on the website to go with the project, and specifically on this timeline of the web. Now, like I said, this is coming up on 30 years of the web, and the obvious thing to do would be look back on the 30 years that have just happened, 30 years of the World Wide Web. But I thought it'd be interesting to also look back to 30 years before the web and what was influencing Tim Berners-Lee in terms of formats and hypertext and computing in general. What were the ideas? What were the principles that informed the creation of the World Wide Web? Unfortunately, Tim Berners-Lee actually published, this was many years later, this was in 1998, he published his design principles. He called them Axioms of Web Architecture. And I would say these are quite useful, particularly in the second part of the double diamond diagram. Because at this point, Tim Berners-Lee he knows what he wants to build. Now it's about building the thing right. And he does indeed borrow from things that have come before. He says, principles such as simplicity and modularity are the stuff of software engineering. So thank you very much, I'll take those. But he also says, decentralization and tolerance are the life and breath of the internet. And the web is built on top of the internet, so it kind of makes sense that he inherited those ideas, borrowed those principles and applied them to the web. In particular, this one, tolerance, I think is very powerful and very underrated when it comes to when we build on top of the web, itself built on top of the internet. And one of the godfathers of the internet was this man, John Postel. He was responsible for the domain name system. And he has an eponymous law named after him, Postel's law, also known as the robustness principle. And I think it's a thing of beauty. It states, be conservative in what you send, be liberal in what you accept. There is some prior art for this. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius in the 2nd century said, be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. But here, John Postel was talking about packet switching, right? How the internet works. Basically, when you're sending out packets, try to make them as well-formed as possible. Be conservative in what you send. But then when you're receiving packets from others, be tolerant in what you accept. Like if you get a badly formed packet, but it's no big deal, don't be a dick about it, right? Don't reject the packet and say, oh no, that's not well-formed. Be tolerant in what you accept. Now, this sounds like it's a very technical principle to do it like packet switching, but I've found it super useful in the design process. All the time, this is like watchwords for me. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're making a form on the web. Well, first rule of form design is use as few form fields as possible. Don't ask the users for something if you don't really need it. In other words, be conservative in what form fields you send to the user. But then when the user's filling out that form, and let's say there's a telephone number or a credit card number, don't make them format it with spaces or without spaces. Be tolerant in what you accept from users. So that's the robustness principle in action. And in particular on the web, I think we've lost sight of this, particularly that first part, that we should be conservative in what we send. And I mean this literally, in what we send down the wire to end users. What we're making users download just to view some text on a screen. Yes, I am talking about JavaScript. Client-side JavaScript. If you're writing JavaScript on a server, go crazy. Do what you want. But when it comes to client-side JavaScript, you're shipping all this stuff to the user. You are not necessarily being conservative in what you send. And yes, that's true of other formats too. You can send big payloads of HTML and CSS, and images, of course, can be problematic. But with JavaScript, it's particularly problematic on the client because the user has to download the JavaScript, the user has to parse the JavaScript, the user has to execute the JavaScript. So it can be a real bottleneck. On the other hand, it is a testament to the power of JavaScript that we've come this far. There's even an eponymous law from Jeff Atwood of Stack Overflow. Atwood's law states, any application that can be written in JavaScript will be written in JavaScript. And like I say, that's a real testament to the power of JavaScript, that you can actually say, like, oh, I'm going to build an app. Should I build it on iOS or desktop or the web, right? We're talking about the web like it's a platform on par with these other platforms, which is really something. But I think we reach for JavaScript on the client again. We reach for client-side JavaScript a bit too quickly. And there's a principle that we could be using more often. The principle of least power. And this was a principle, like the robustness principle, that was a direct influence on Tim Berners-Lee in the design of the World Wide Web. The principle of least power states, choose the least powerful language suitable for a given purpose, which sounds very counterintuitive. Why on earth would I choose the least powerful language? Well, the idea here is that power comes with a price. The more powerful a language is, the more prone it might be to breaking. Whereas the simpler and dumber a language is, the more likely it is to be ubiquitous, available everywhere, and to be that little bit more robust. I'll give you an example from my friend Derek Featherstone. He works in the accessibility space. And he said this, he said, in the web front-end stack, which he defines as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and ARIA, if you can solve a problem with a simpler solution lower in the stack, you should. It's less fragile, more foolproof, and just works. So he isn't even talking specifically about accessibility here. He's talking about reliability. He's talking about resilience. And this makes sense. I mean, ARIA is the classic example. You know, pretty much the first rule of ARIA is there a way that you can't not use ARIA? Like, is there an HTML element that does the job? Then use the HTML element instead of using ARIA. Likewise, if something you're doing with JavaScript that you could actually be doing with CSS, you should probably be doing with CSS, right? Always look for the simpler solution lower down in the stack. The government digital services in the UK, they're the ones who make the gov.uk website. They have a list of design principles. They're very good, even though they are exactly 10 design principles, which, OK, I'll give them a pass. But one of the principles I really like, the principle itself simply states, do less. But they explain what they mean by saying government should only do what only government can do. The idea being here is that the website could be doing all sorts of stuff, but if there's, you know, another service out there on the web that gives you the information, use that. The government doesn't have to be providing everything, but there are certain things that only the government can provide, and that's what we should be concentrating on. So I really like this principle, and I think it can be abstracted into the world of technology. If I abstract it, it states any particular technology should only do what only that particular technology can do, which is getting a bit too abstract. So let's tighten it up with a specific example. JavaScript should only do what only JavaScript can do. We can call this Keith's Law, perhaps. I'll give you some example of when you're choosing. Thank you. That's a joke, by the way. I don't think we should actually call it Keith's Law. I'm not that egotistical. So if you're building on the web, you're going to be confronted with choices, and you're going to have decisions to make. So I want to wrap up with 3 different kind of components that you might be confronted with, where you might have to make a choice and how you would build the thing right. So let's start with a classic, the one that's at the heart of every design system, right? A button component. Well, one way of building a button component is use a div or span and a whole bunch of CSS to style it, a whole bunch of JavaScript and all the event handlers, and you're going to need a whole bunch of ARIA as well to make sure it's accessible. Or you just use a button element, and you style it with CSS to make it look any way you want. So in this decision-making process, there is a clear winner here. There's like one easy answer, which is you use a button element. Like, there is literally no reason to do this. I mean, maybe decades ago, Internet Explorer version something made it really hard to style buttons, but we are well past that. So, in this particular example, super easy decision to make. Definitely going to use a button element. I'm a lazy developer, right? I want to do the thing that comes with the built-in behavior and comes in with the built-in accessibility, so I don't have to do all that work. So, next component, a drop-down component where the user has to choose one item from a list of many items. Well, again, you can make this yourself from scratch, divs, spans, style it how you want with CSS. You're going to have to add in all that JavaScript to make sure it works, and add in the area, make sure it works with keyboards, make sure, all these different things you're going to have to think about. Or you just use a select element and you style it with CSS. Now, here it's not quite as clear-cut as with a button, because I can style a select element with CSS when it's closed. Once it's in an open state, there's certain things are kind of off limits to CSS, at the moment anyway. And I can't quite style it maybe exactly how I want it. Now, to me personally, I'm like, that's fine, I'll live with that, that's okay. But I can kind of understand that if you're in the kind of organization, shipping the kind of software where you really want the control over every pixel, I'm not going to judge you if you go ahead and use divs and spans and aria and all that stuff. Silently, I will be judging you, but I won't say it publicly. The final component, a date picker. Now you can see where this is going. Because again, you can build this yourself, div, span, CSS, JavaScript, lots of area, or the lazy option, the more, the one that comes with the built-in accessibility, the built-in behavior is you use input type equals date. Yeah, but then if I want to style it in a certain way, forget about it. Now again, depending on your priorities, you might choose one or the other. I would probably still choose to use input type equals date because I'm so lazy and I don't want to have to do all this work. But again, I can absolutely see why somebody building a date picker on the web is going to go down the route of using the divs and the spans. You kind of got this battle here between the under-engineered solution, the lazy solution as I say, and the over-engineered solution where you've got to build everything from scratch. The under-engineered solution is quite good for users because you don't have to ship much to them, just some HTML. The over-engineered solution, there's a penalty to be paid there. The users have to download, parse, execute a bunch of JavaScript. But both are valid. It depends on what you prioritize. The under-engineered solution is prioritizing access. How can I let the most number of people access these controls? That might be in terms of accessibility, it might be literally in terms of the file size, how much it's going to take to download that stuff. Whereas this is all about control. And if what you care about is control, having that pixel perfection, then I get it. I get why you would do that. There's this spectrum here from least power to most power, from least control to most control, and consistency. So if you care about consistency, I do get it. But we're building on the web. As my friend Eric said, the web does not value consistency. The web values ubiquity. Or, to put it another way, ubiquity, even over consistency. It's not that we don't value consistency, but we value ubiquity more. This also passes the reversibility test, because you can imagine another medium, another platform, where it makes sense to say consistency even over ubiquity. If you're building on iOS or Android, that makes sense. When we were building with Flash, it was all about the consistency, but it came at a price. You had to have the Flash plugin installed. So you didn't get the same ubiquity as you got with the web. On the World Wide Web, this should be our principle. Ubiquity, even over consistency. And I showed you the very first website here. This is the very first website. It's still available at its first URL. And this is how it looked in the very first web browser, which is quite something. But what's really amazing is that you can visit this website in a modern browser, a browser that was just released this week, and it will still work 30 years later. And that's quite something. I mean, if you took a word processing file from 30 years ago and you tried to open it today, good luck with that. And yet the web has managed to maintain this backward compatibility as it's grown and got more powerful and become a web app platform. So it's worth bearing those principles of the World Wide Web in mind when you are building on the web. Apply the principle of least power. Apply the robustness principle. Be conservative in what you send. Be tolerant in what you accept. And value ubiquity, even over consistency. That way, you will make products and services that are not just on the web, but of the web. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you for that, and thank you for sticking through the technical challenges. And now we're going to do a short break. It's probably going to be less than 5 minutes, and we're going to go on with the next presentation. So if you have to stay here, then cool. Please stay here. If you're not going to stay here, then please run out of the room and make some place for other people that are coming in. And enjoy yourself.
Are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.